Why do you think people are so sensitive about this issue? Because I'm sure you've experienced this, or at least heard about it, that there's certain topics, like let's say pornography, for example. If you even so much as broach the subject of pornography in a negative context and say, hey, you know what, maybe this isn't good for society, maybe this is not good for people's mental health and they should try to abstain from it, there's a cohort of people, not everyone, who gets extremely offensive and angry at even the mention of such an idea. You don't have to be mean, you could be totally reasonable, but people kind of fly off the handle. And I find that for a lot of these types of issues that it really touches a nerve with some people. Why do you think that is?
I don't claim to be the fount of all knowledge. And so I am just giving you my own perspective here, which may or may not be, true. But first of all, I think there is a tendency within us as human beings to want to throw off all constraints. We don't want anything to control us or anybody to tell us. Now, in some sense, that there's good aspects to that because it provides checks and balances against, let's say, the rise of authoritarianism within government. But in another sense, throwing off all constraints can be devastating. But let's say pornography, for example, there is a substantial percentage of our population that is actually addicted to it. And from a scientific perspective, when you begin to watch and use pornography, there is an endorphin rush. You get a rush out of that, and the body says, whoa, like there's something going, this is over the top here, we need to moderate that. And the body releases another protein which binds the endorphin receptors to bring down the level of enjoyment of that to more sustainable levels. But when it does that, it reduces the level of all other pleasures. But since that spike is the highest pleasure, one loses pleasure in almost everything else. And so pornography becomes an addiction. And when you start to challenge something that people are addicted to, or that a part of the population is addicted to, well, that is a serious threat to the person. They're going to react in some very significant ways. So that's just part of the problem. I don't, but there's more to it than that. And I haven't put my finger on the whole story. It's mystifying because it should be so patently obvious that porn is not good for a person. There's plenty, both secular and religious. I prefer a lot of times just refer to secular research, because if you look at the religious aspect of things, people just write you off right there. But if you look at the secular research, it is pretty much unanimous that when you actually look at it from a biological perspective, that pornography actually debilitates a person's ability to even, especially men, to be able to have sex with women. And so they need more weirder or off the beaten track type of porn, and it just degenerates from that point on.
I mean, there's so many pieces of evidence now to suggest that there are young boys, teenage boys as young as 18 and 19, who are developing erectile dysfunction because they're so entrenched in this thing. And of course, that's not it's not the majority of people. It might not even be, a lot of people. But the fact that that's happening in society, and I don't ever hear it being talked about, we hear about all kinds of things, how smoking is bad for your health and excessive alcohol. In fact, our health service here in Ireland was just talking about banning smoking altogether because it's such a terrible public health crisis. When have we ever heard about pornography as a public health crisis? Because it is, frankly, when you look at the impact that it has on so many, particularly young men, but young women now as well, unfortunately. And nobody has ever warned about the potential dangers of that.
Yeah, several years ago, I did a little bit of investigation into this. There are secular websites now for men, young men and teenagers who want to just try and get rid of the grip that porn has on them. But erectile dysfunction is a very common consequence of this protein that binds on the endorphin receptors to reduce the pleasure. So to put it simply, the traditional way of being aroused no longer works, simply because they're used to getting a wider variety of stimulation through the eyes watching porn in a wider variety of activities. And as that increases, that's why they need more variety in the porn and more variety in the type of people that are watching on porn videos. So erectile dysfunction is a very real component. And there's, I think one of the websites is nofap.com. I think it's nofap.com. Now that was a few years back. Whether it's still up and running, I don't know. But that's a secular website where a lot of guys are saying, you know, this is not doing it for me. Or what they will need is, before they can have an erection, they would need to watch a porn video with the woman they're with in order to get sufficiently excited to be able to actually do it with their girlfriend. So it's very debilitating. There's no question about that. And not only that I read an article, and it was done in the UK, on the effect of porn on 11 to 14-year-olds. And what the writer noticed is that the girls are increasingly fearful of having sexual relations with guys simply because of what those guys want them to do that they've seen on porn sites. And so what this is actually doing is creating, making a lot of young women are repulsed by the idea of having sex with men as a result of what the men are asking the women to do. And this itself goes in another direction as well.
So would you say it's fair to say then that it's kind of devastated the relationships between men and women, particularly young men and women growing up in, say, my generation and younger?
I would say so. It does, and for a number of reasons, but it not only devastates relationships, what the longer term results are of the sexual revolution is it destroys the enjoyment of sex itself, at least the normal traditional ideas of sexual relations. And instead, it drives a person to further fringes of things that are off the beaten track, let's say.